Hello and welcome. This is Dawn with a video for Pinkfresh Studio. Today we're going to be creating with the new release, specifically the Heart of Gold product suite. This is a winner in my book. I love these sweet images and anything with a bird on it, I'm in. And today I'm going to be creating this fun pop-up card with glitter accents. Now the Heart of Gold suite has a stamp set, a coordinating die, and a coordinating stencil available. I'm going to be using all three today, and I'm going to use one of the layers of the stencils to add some glittered details. In fact, I think I'm going to use 2 layers. I'm going to start out by stamping my image first. I like to stamp and then do my ink blending with the stencils. It just makes it easier for me to line up the stencils. And I've opted to stamp my images in a mid-tone brown for a little bit softer look. So here's a look at the stencils. You get 5 in this set, and each layer is going to allow you to precisely color each portion of this image. And you could do this in any order that you'd like, but the suggested order is etched in the top of each of these stencils. So this one is stencil 1. This is going to color my lemons and the bird's body here. So I'm just going to line this up over my stamped image, and then I'm using a sticky mat underneath. This will hold my stencil in place while I do my ink blending. And I'll be using the 1/2-inch blending brushes for all of my stenciling today. I'm starting out with limoncello to do the lemons. These are adorable, adorable little images, and you could easily make these limes as well. Here in Florida, we grow Meyer lemons, and they are a deeper yellow to an orangey color. So that's what I'm going to do with mine, and I can easily warm these up just a bit by adding a little bit of sun-kissed to this. So I'm going to go ahead and take some sun-kissed, and I'm just going to bring this around the edges just to deepen up those edges and warm up this yellow a little bit. Now, just because we're using stencils to color these images doesn't mean that we can't still take some creative liberties and really make these our own. You can change it up by just varying the amount of pressure and the amount of color that you apply through the stencil. So you could make these super saturated and solid, or you could lightly build up your color and add in a little bit of depth and shadows by deepening up the edges, like I'm doing here. Now, likewise, you could completely create new colors. So for my bird's body here, I'm using a little bit of waterfall, but it was a little bit brighter than I wanted. I do love this color, and I think it's beautiful contrasting with that lemon color, but I wanted to mute it down just a little bit. So I'm adding a little bit of wisteria over that, and that's going to kind of smoke out this blue just a bit. So here, when we remove the stencil, you can see now it's just a little bit more muted, a little softer. Next, you'll lay down the next stencil, line it up with your image, and then just start stenciling. Now for these leaves, I am going to start off with a little bit of bay leaf, and I'm going to ink blend that lightly. I don't want to go too dark just yet, because remember, I can always build and add more color if I need to, but I can't take it away. And there's an additional layer that we're going to put on top of this later that's going to add a little bit more of a detail layer, which is going to be even darker. So I know that I can start off a little bit lighter and then add more color if necessary. This is just an easy way to get that very soft, almost fairy tale-like look, but also it's fun to go ahead and switch it up and do that super full-on saturated color. You can get a totally different look. So now I wanted to green these up a little bit. That bay leaf is more like a green gold, and I wanted to bring this to more like a true green. So I'm just adding a little bit of eucalyptus over top of that, what was that, bay leaf? Just a little bit of that on top of that bay leaf, and it's going to shift this to more of a true green, but I'm going to leave some of that bay leaf showing at the edges. Again, this is another great way to add a little bit of interest because you're going to get some beautiful color blends, so don't be afraid to try some different color combos. We use that same technique for the bird's leaf, a little bit of that waterfall, followed by a little bit of the wisteria. Occasionally I can raise my stencil to check to see if I've gone dark enough, and if not, I can add a little bit more color. And now we're moving on to the 4th stencil. Now for that 4th stencil, I wanted a very light smoky blue for the centers of these flowers. So just like the bird, I'm going to start with that waterfall, and then I'm going to go over that with a little bit of wisteria. And then for the detail layer of the leaves, I'm going to go in with straight eucalyptus. This is going to be darker and more green than our previous blend, so it's going to show up beautifully. And I'm going to hold off on that last stencil because I'm going to be applying glitter through it. And in the meantime, I'm going to repeat the same process for a second image. All right, now both of those are done, and it is time to add our glitter details. And we're going to be using a combo of the Ranger Distress Glitter and Rock Candy and the Distress Frosted Crystal. Now the Distress Frosted Crystal, it provides a crystallized matte finish to your surface. However, if you overheat it, it becomes sticky and we can use it to adhere glitter. So we're going to go ahead and use that property in our favor here. We're going to lay down the final stencil and I'm going to add a little bit of Versamark to it. Now you can use a sponge dauber here. You could use the sponge applicator, anything that you have on hand. A makeup sponge would work, even your finger. So we're going to pick up some of that Versamark and we're going to apply it through the stencil. I would recommend treating your paper with an anti-static tool of some sort before you do this, or else you're going to get that frosted crystal in places you may not want it, and then your glitter is going to adhere in places you may not want it. Now in this particular image, I wasn't too worried about it. If there was some little extra glitter, I was okay with it because who doesn't love glitter? Especially with this method, because this method traps the glitter and it will not shed. So this is a game changer for adding glitter. As far as I'm concerned, I used to avoid glitter at all costs. Now I'm glittering all the things. You couldn't stop me if you tried. All right, so you can see here I'm sprinkling that frosted crystal over my image, and then because I did not treat my paper with anti-static tool, I'm just using my finger to brush away any unwanted frosted crystal. Again, I got some in some areas, but it wasn't a big deal to me. Now you're going to want to move quickly, so I'm going to go ahead and funnel this back into my jar and move it out of the way, because once we melt this, we're going to want to move rather quickly. You can see I've already got my jar of glitter open over there on the side. I'm heating up my heat gun so that I don't warp my paper. And then I'm going to go ahead and melt this. Now, the frosted crystal has a lower melting point, so it's going to melt pretty fast. It's going to go matte. It'll have a crystallized looking haze to it, but it's going to be matte. When you overheat it, it goes shiny and sticky. So we're going to melt this, and I do one side at a time because, again, we need to move pretty quickly. I'm going to grab that glitter, and I'm just going to pour it over top of my image, shake off the excess. And then you can see here that we've got the glitter stuck everywhere that we had the frosted crystal. At this point, if I have glitter somewhere I don't want it, I can knock it off. And then I'm going to take my heat gun and melt it again. This is the secret. This is where it traps that glitter. And this will make it so that it does not shed and it does not rub off. All right, I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, and that'll give the first image time to cool down a little bit. Again, overheat that frosted crystal, and then grab our glitter and pour it over. We'll knock off the excess, and I can be pretty aggressive here because the powder has become sticky and it is holding that glitter. And then I just reheat it, and again, that will trap that glitter. Now, when I'm all done, I always like to take the final piece and just kind of rub my hand over it pretty aggressively. I want to knock off any glitter that's not firmly adhered and trapped within that crystal glaze. That way my recipient isn't getting glitter everywhere. So I just take my hand, rub it across, knock off any excess glitter, and you can see here that I don't have any laying on my desk. There's none left on my hands, so I know we're good to go. All right, I can tap it here. You see nothing is falling on the desk, nothing on my hands, but yet look at all of this beautiful glitter. Such a fun technique, and I'm telling you guys, I glitter everything now. All right, so let's go ahead and turn this into a card. I'm using the coordinating cuts here to die cut out my images, and for these intricately cut dies, I like to tape my dies in place, and I'll tape it in more than one spot. These dies cut around all of this image, and they cut like the little innard areas so that you get a real dainty die cut. And I find that taping these in a couple places really helps to make sure that the die stays in place and you get a nice even cut. And you can see here how gorgeous, how intricately cut this is. And I'm in love with this little image, you guys. So good. All right, so for our pop-up frame card here, we're going to need the front panel, which is going to be your standard 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card. Then we're going to need our panel that has our pop-up mechanism on it. So for that, we need a piece that is 5.5 inch by 5 3/4 inch. And we're going to take that 5 3/4 inch piece, we're going to score it at 1/4 inch intervals on each side. So if you're reading it from the right side, you're going to score it at 1/4 inch. Then you're going to score it at 1/2 inch. And then you're going to score it one more time at 3/4 inch. And if you're reading it from the left side, you're going to slide your paper to 5.5 inches and score, 5 1/4 inches and score, and 5 inches and score. Then you're just going to flip the paper and you're going to do the same thing. Score it at 1/4 inch, score it at 1/2 inch, and then score it again at 3/4 inch. Now this is going to give us like an accordion fold, which is going to be our spring, which is going to create that pop-up effect on our card. And then when you're all done, you can double check that's the gap in between your scores should be 4 1/4 inches. And here's a closer look. You can see our score lines on either side. And again, when we double check it, the distance between those first score lines is 4 1/4 inches. All right, and now it's time to create our frame. For that, we're going to be using the Essentials braided tag die. Now this comes with 3 dies. You can cut the tag base, and you have these 2 other dies in here that you can use to cut detail into the tag. Now you can use 1 or all 3 dies or any combination that you want. So this piece is going to be our background and this piece is our top. So we're going to start with our top. We need to create our window. That's what we're going to use our tag die for. So we're going to go ahead and center this in the middle of our cardstock here. And I'm going to tape it into place and run it through my die cut machine. This is going to give me my window, and I'm going to save this tag for another project. All right, so now that we have our window, we can go ahead and get our placement for our little details that are going to show through inside. So I'm going to line this up, and I'm actually going to tape it into place so that it doesn't shift on me. I just want these to be taped together so they'll act as one unit since they are 2 separate dies. Now you can see here that it's not quite centered on my panel here. I need it to be perfectly centered. So I'm going to move this piece off to the side now, and we're going to line up our back panel with our front panel so that it is perfectly centered. So to do that, I'm going to turn this over. I'm going to line up that panel here with the score lines, and then I'm going to tape this into place. So this is just temporary, but this lets me know that this panel is precisely centered and exactly where it's eventually going to be adhered. So I'll tape that into place like I mentioned. Then I'll flip this whole thing over and line up my detail dies in the center of that opening. Now this detail is going to show through the window, and that's why I need this to be perfectly centered. All right, now that I've got it lined up perfectly, I'll push that tape into place, and then I'll run this through my die cut machine. Another tip here, I'm using very low tack washi tape. In fact, this washi tape has been used a couple of times so that I don't risk tearing my paper here, because we are using this full panel, this full piece, and everything will show. And so if you can use the lowest tack tape possible, that's the best bet. So now you can see all this beautiful detail that that die has cut into this paper. I like to just take my fingers and rub it across this area, and that will help push out all of those extra little bits. Any ones that are stubborn, I'll just use my pokey tool to poke those through, but 99% of the time just rubbing my fingers across it like this helps loosen up and pop out all of those little bits. All right, so now it's time to do our little accordion fold here. I'm going to folded each of my score lines to go ahead and create that little Z fold or accordion fold. I like to use my bone folder to reinforce the fold. So the first one I will fold away from me, and then I will fold towards me, and then for the next one I will fold away from me again. Now this is going to create a pretty shallow little pop-up box. If you wanted it to be deeper, you could make your overall paper a little larger, and you could score at 1/2 inch. Instead of every 1/4 inch, you could do 1/2 inch. And this would give you a larger little spring, and it would cause a deeper little shadow box. Flip it around and do the exact same thing on your other score lines to create your little pop-up mechanism on the other side. All right, so with our folds all reinforced, we have our little pop-up mechanism created. So here you can see when we push down, like to put it in an envelope, it goes flat, and you can see those little springs there on the side. This is going to go right on top of our background here. And again, it'll push down to go in an envelope and pop up when it comes out. All right, so let's go ahead and start putting together our card. I have these two pieces here that I've die cut, and just for a little bit of extra stability, I did back these with an extra blank die cut. So I just adhered a blank die cut behind this one. It makes it a little bit thicker. And I'm going to put one of these inside my window here. I'm alone like this. You could put a sentiment on it and be done, but that's not how I roll. I got to fill up every inch, you guys. It's just every spot's got to be covered with something. All right, so once I've figured out where I want this to go, I have to adhere that spring mechanism to my card base. So I got to remove this extra little bit right here. I need to be able to go paper to paper here. I can't have that little piece sticking between them. So I'm just going to trim off that little excess, and this will ensure that my springs will adhere directly to my back. And then I will eventually cut off that little piece that's hanging down. I'm going to get my bird situated where I want him. And then now I'm just taking a look at how I can cut apart this other die cut to add some layers here on the top of the window. I want depth and dimension. This is no secret. So I'm going to start by adhering this first one to the back panel with a thinner foam tape. I love to use different thicknesses of foam tape on my projects. Again, it just adds that extra little bit of depth, because one can never have too much dimension, whether it's physical dimension or dimension in your color. I'm going to adhere this directly to the back, again, with that the thinnest of thin foam tapes. Making sure, again, that this will clear the sides before I really push it into place. And then I'm going to trim off any excess. And now I need to decide exactly where I'm going to put my sentiment. So I know it's going to float inside of this window, but before I adhere my stuff on top, I've got to make sure that it won't obscure my sentiment. So we're going to go ahead and stamp that out. We're stamping our sentiment in Atlantis. This is a beautiful, beautiful blue. And I wasn't sure exactly which sentiment I wanted to use, so I'm stamping all three of the larger scripty sentiments in this set out, and then I'll use the coordinating cuts to die cut it. Ultimately, I chose the Sending Sunshine and Smiles sentiment. It's going to live about right here. And in order to float that sentiment, I'm going to adhere it to a piece of acetate that I'm going to glue inside of my frame. All right, and in order to glue it inside of the frame, it needs to be a little bit shorter. Remember, we've got that spring mechanism on the back, that little accordion fold. So it needs to be slightly shorter than the 4 1/4. So what I've got here is a piece of acetate that's about 2 inches tall and about 4 inches long. We're going to adhere our sentiment to the acetate, and then we're going to adhere our acetate to the inside of the window. Now you could use liquid adhesive here if you'd like. I like the double-sided adhesive. I've got 1/8 of an inch double-sided adhesive here, and I like it because it grabs quickly. I don't have to hold it in place. Because I'm gluing this to the inside of that window, I would have to hold it until the glue actually started to set. I find it much easier to use the double-sided adhesive here. So we're going to glue the sentiment to the center of our acetate, and I'm using my grid mat underneath for my placement. You can see I've set my acetate between 2 grid lines, and then I'm going to use the grid lines on that mat to perfectly line up my sentiment. So it is perfectly centered both vertically and horizontally on that acetate strip. Give that glue a little bit of time to adhere, and then we can go ahead and adhere this to the inside of the window. You'll notice that I've flipped my window upside down. So those little springs are facing up toward me instead of down. This is going to allow me to just flip that sentiment over and adhere it in exactly the right spot vertically. I can see my bird through the window, and I can make sure that my sentiment will not be covering my bird. So I want it just slightly above. I like to adhere one side of this first and then stick down the other side. But here we go. I can get this perfectly straight and press it into place. So with the main elements together, I can go ahead and adhere the front to the back now. I'm going to take some liquid adhesive and put it on each of my little springs here. I like to use liquid adhesive on this one versus the double-sided tape because it does give me a little bit of playtime to kind of wiggle everything into place. So I like to adhere one side first. I'll line up those edges, push it into place, give it a second to take hold, and then I will go ahead and do the other side as well. And once you've got these together, you can go ahead and put it under something heavy to give that glue time to set if you need to. So you can see here, it'll do that little bouncy spring action, and you could leave this just like this if you wanted to, or you could step it up like we're gonna do. So I have that extra piece that I colored and cut, and I'm gonna end up cutting this into a couple different little sections and using all of the little leftover pieces to embellish around the rest of this card. So I've cut off one portion. It's gonna eventually live right up here in the upper left-hand corner. Then I'm going to cut it into another section here. Now there's a lot of different ways that you could do this to make it your own. You could come up with your own layout. I'm actually going to end up using just these little bits of flowers here to tuck on the inside as well. And I'm going to use a thicker foam tape. So even though it's on the inside, it'll be just a little higher than the original bird that we adhered. I'm going to cut off another little segment and add it to the lower left-hand side. And then eventually I will use a leftover segment from this top piece right here. I will use this little piece to adhere over here on the right side. And once everything's in place and dry, I'm going to flip over my card and trim off any excess that's hanging over the edges with a sharp pair of scissors. And that'll finish off the front of the card. You can see here we've got that cute little springy action, but I decided I wanted some color to peek through those little details, right? We've cut them in there, why have it just be white? So I had a leftover little tag here in blue, and I decided to just adhere that over the back there where we had cut out those details. And I really think that this added a lot. I love it so much. It really makes those details stand out. Finally, all we have to do is adhere this to a card base. So I'm going to use some liquid adhesive, and we're just going to adhere it directly to a standard A2 card base. Another option would be to adhere it to the center of a slightly larger card base that maybe you had used an embossing folder on or did some stenciling. That would be really cute too, to have a little center portion that popped up. There are a lot of different options that you could use this technique for. And that finishes our project today. You can see up close here all of that beautiful sparkle that little bit of detail with that glitter adds. I love the targeted application using that stencil. You can also see with the little pop-up mechanisms how your card stands up nicely. It also folds flat to go into an envelope and then pops for the recipient when they open it. I absolutely loved making this card, and I enjoyed using this set so much. If you're looking for any of the supplies, you'll find them linked in the description box below. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. As always, I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.